have notes on this? Because Tony and Dave do. I wish I had them on there. Hmm. Let's see.
Can you hear the power of love? Okay, we'll start. When you're ready, Helen?
Yep.
You can ask questions at the end of the session. There's plenty of opportunity. But without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Helen Scott, who will take you through EMR 1 year on.
Good morning, everyone. Can I have a thumbs up that you can actually hear me in your headphones? Great, that's good news. Good place to start. So my name's Helen Scott. I'm the Market Change Manager at Empower Business Solutions, and I look at all of the policy changes that are impacting our customers. So if you've got any policy questions, we're on the stand downstairs today, so it doesn't just have to be EMR. So electricity market reform, I'm sure everybody's heard of it before, but for those that are maybe not so familiar with it, this is the government's reform programme to introduce secure, low carbon and affordable electricity into the UK for future years. So policy's been around for a long time. It's been on the political agenda for many years, but the legislation was only finalised in June last year and implementation began shortly after that. So today I'm going to talk to you about what's happened in the last 12 months, what we expect to happen next, and also what your businesses can do about the impacts of EMR. So I thought the best place to start is probably with a bit of a recap of what EMR is. There's two main mechanisms that make up the costs of EMR. There's the capacity mechanism, and the first one that I'll talk to you about is contracts for difference, or CFDs. So CFDs is all about the low carbon investment. CFDs promotes more low carbon electricity in the UK by offering generators a fixed price for the energy that they produce, and that works in the forms of a top-up on top of the wholesale price for electricity. It covers all traditional renewable technologies, but it also covers carbon capture and storage and nuclear technologies as well, and it works in the form of a competitive auction. CFDs will effectively replace the RO from 2017, and the two run concurrently until then. After 2017, for any new projects over 5 megawatts, CFD will be the only form of support. There's a new government body that's been set up to operate contracts for difference, and that's the Low Carbon Contracts Company, and I'll refer to them a bit later on. So the most important thing to know in terms of if you're an energy buyer, if you're a consultant, is that the costs of CFDs are going to be picked up by suppliers, and therefore they'll be passed on to consumers through electricity bills. So everybody is going to have to pay the costs of the CFDs. There will be some form of exemptions for the most intensive of energy users, so people like steel manufacturers, but they're not in place yet. So the second mechanism that I spoke to that's going to have a direct impact to consumers is the capacity mechanism. If CFDs was all about low carbon energy, capacity mechanism is all about providing that security of supply, which will become even more important once we get into the world where we've got more and more intermittent generation online, such as wind and solar. So this is about works in the form of an auction, and it is aimed at traditional generation as opposed to low carbon, and also for demand side response. So any large businesses that are able to shift their load at certain times and when it's needed to reduce the stress on the system can also participate in the capacity mechanism. So auction will happen every year, and they will take place for capacity 4 years ahead, and then there'll be a second top-up auction every year as well, and that top-up auction is aimed at really allowing demand-side response to participate as well. Those that are successful in the auction will then be responsible to provide that energy when it's needed, or they will face a penalties. So that's how it will work, and it gives them a steady retainer payment to be there when needed. Again, there's another government body that's been set up to manage this, and that's called the Electricity Settlements Company. Again, I guess I've already kind of alluded to it, capacity mechanism will be recovered through suppliers and therefore consumers. This will have no form of exemption for any types of industries at all, but what is interesting about the capacity mechanism is that it's going to be charged to suppliers based on a certain period of time, and that's based on their share of consumption over the winter peak period. So depending on your supplier, there could be the opportunity to manage some of the costs of the capacity mechanism, but I'll touch up on that at the end. So looking back over what has happened for the past year, there have been many successes since EMR implementation began, mostly around the auctions. So the first CFD auction took place in January this year. That allocated 25 projects with a CFD contract, and due to the competitive allocation process, that saved consumers 105 million a year compared to the original strike prices that were published for those technologies that were successful. Similar story with the capacity mechanism. The first auction took place at the end of last year, and according to where the capacity mechanism was meant to clear, it actually ended up almost half of that cost. So good news for consumers who are picking up the costs, and also good value for money in terms of those first auctions that have taken place. However, there has been a bit of a change of pace over the last 6 months. Looking at where we expected to be by now, we expected charges to be flowing through to suppliers and also onto energy bills from April this year, and we expected the energy intensive exemptions to start shortly after that in October. Also in October, we were anticipating news about the next CFD auction and also what the budget would be for that auction, which really helps for budgeting and planning what the cost of CFDs will be for the next few years. However, where we actually are is timescales have slipped, and there's no real certainty at the moment, at least, as to when that will pick up again. Cost did start in April, but that was the operational cost only associated with the running of the low carbon contracts company and the electricity settlements company that I mentioned earlier. So in the grand scheme of things, quite a negligible charge. There is anticipated to be a cost coming through for CFDs from Q1 next year. However, there's some uncertainty as to whether that will actually be the case, or if it will actually outturn as zero, because the only generator expected to be ready is Drax Biomass Station, and that's actually still waiting for state aid approval. So without that, they can't actually receive any subsidies at all. So in some respects, probably thinking that a delay is good. It means that we don't actually have to start picking up these costs yet, but it does create uncertainty. It's not necessarily that the costs are reducing, it's just that we don't know when they're going to start coming through, and that makes things like budget certainty really quite difficult. Energy intensive exemptions have also been delayed. Again, that's because they need state aid approval before they can begin. This is now delayed until January at the earliest, but it could be even longer. We also have no notice of when the next CFD auction will be, and more importantly, what the budget for that auction will be. We suspect that's due to bigger issues in terms of budget certainty with DEC and also the spending review, and we'll wait to see what will happen with that. In terms of the capacity mechanism, though, there is a lot more stability compared to CFDs. So in terms of the timescales for the second year, the auction timetable is on track. Pre-qualification results were published in September, and the auction is due to take place in December this year. We wait to see what the impact will be. So this year will be the first year that interconnectors can participate in the capacity mechanism, and also demand side response. So this year is the first of 2 transitional arrangement auctions that will really test the role of DSR in the capacity mechanism, but also act as a bit of a trial for those companies that are seeing if demand side response is something that they could earn revenue through or not. So in terms of what happened to create this delay, there's a couple of things that I wanted to pull out. So the first one is the new government since May. We've already seen a bit of a shift in the energy policy that's gone from pro-renewables under the coalition to more about pro-business for Tories. There's a number of quick decisions that have happened since May, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, that have had a knock-on impact to the renewables sector. So things such as the the removal of subsidies for onshore wind from the RO from April next year, the very unexpected removal of exemptions from CCL for renewables in the summer budget, and also the drastic reduction in FIT tariffs, which is due to take place next year. The consultation is just closed. So although Tories are committed to EMR, these measures, along with not knowing much more about the next CFD auction, just creates more investor uncertainty. So related to that, the second reason that I wanted to pull out is pressure on budgets, and especially around the levy control framework. So the levy control framework sets the government spending on all low carbon subsidies, so that's the renewables obligation, feed-in tariff and contracts for difference, there is a different rate year on year that this budget is capped to, and for 2020 it's capped at 7.6 billion. Now this is already reported to be overspent by 1.5 billion, so a lot of these measures that I spoke about a minute ago have all been about getting spending under control. The impact of these policies, though, is not yet clear, so we think that the closure of our for onshore wind from the RO and also the changes to the FIT tariffs will create a bit of a rush for support from those eligible generators over the next few months. So until we really know what's happened up until those closures, we don't really understand the full impact of the budget, and that could just cause a further stretch. We suspect that the government is probably waiting to understand that impact before they do commit to any CFD budgets. In the long run, though, these measures could create room for CFDs in the future. The last point for me on the levy control framework is that we only know what the budget is going to be up until the end of the decade. After that point, we know nothing yet. The budgets are released every 5 years, and we wait to see what the budgets will be from 2020 to 2025. Until we know that, we've got no idea how much our customers will be paying on their energy bills for these different renewable subsidies. So in terms of what's next and what we're expecting over the next 12 months, well, imminently we hope to get answers to some of the questions I've already alluded to. So when is the next CFD auction? What is the budget going to be for that auction? What's going to be the pot of money for the levy control framework from next decade? And also those important state aid decisions that will allow EMR to really kick in. So that's on the energy intensive exemptions, but also on Drax biomass stations and a few other early projects that were waiting for state aid clearance. We also, over the next year, will hopefully learn more about DSR in the capacity mechanism and what the opportunity looks like, and we should hopefully have more certainty on costs to consumers over the next few years. So I guess for me, before I move on to what can your business do about it, the headlines for me on policy is that there have been some successes since implementation. Overall, EMR definitely does still have the ability to achieve its aims, but at the moment it's clouded by quite a lot of uncertainty, and that uncertainty is both for investors in the energy industry, whether that be renewables or traditional generation, but also for businesses who ultimately are the ones picking up the costs. So I think it's probably fair to say, or maybe not, but EMR has faded from the minds of people over the last few months, especially as more imminent policies such as P272 have come into effect, which create the need for urgent action. However, although EMR has started with more of a fizzle than a big bang, it is still important to know what is coming, what the costs will look like, so that you can prepare over the next few years. So in terms of the cost impacts, by the end of the decade, DEC forecasted £8 a megawatt hour by 2020 for CFDs. For capacity mechanism, based on the auction that cleared last year, that equates to £3.50 a megawatt hour over your annual consumption. There's no clarity yet after that date because of the way that the auction works, but hopefully by the end of the year, once that auction has happened, we will have a lot more certainty as to what the next year looks like. So that's a total of £11.50 a megawatt hour for EMR costs, and that's on top of all of your other non-commodity costs, which are only set to go up as well over the next few years. So we do have another talk later on this afternoon about all of the other costs that make up your electricity bill if you want to know more, and my colleague Peter will be talking a bit more about these EMR costs and what they're set to look like over the next few years. So in terms of what you can do to mitigate the costs of EMR, well, I suppose the most obvious is to look at energy efficiency. You don't have to pay for what you don't actually take off the grid, so energy efficiency measures will help you avoid all of those non-commodity costs that we talked about already. Then also there's look at the time of use, which I alluded to when I talked about the capacity mechanism. So the slides aren't necessarily showing as well as they should do at the moment. There seems to be a bit of overlap. But you can see this is an example of a day in November in 2018, and it's in London, so it could potentially be a bit higher than in other areas. But you can see the shape of costs throughout that day, and the capacity mechanism, that £3.50 a megawatt hour over your annual consumption, actually equates to £90 a megawatt hour over the winter peak period only. That's suppliers are charged. So if you start to add all of these costs on top of each other, especially as you have the red Duos bands at winter time, it could also be a triad half hour as well. It creates quite a compelling story to start looking at the time you're using, not just your overall consumption, and seeing what you can do to maybe avoid those real peak periods. So EMR also brings opportunities to businesses as well. Demand side response, it's there for traditional for customers that are able to load shift to earn revenue on equal terms with traditional generation. There are some transitional arrangements. The first one obviously has closed for pre-qualification this year, but there will be a subsequent one next year as well. So there are opportunities for you to try with lower penalties before committing to the full capacity mechanism. There's also some pilots going on around looking at your energy efficiency. EDR is one of those that has come under deck, but also there's a Treasury consultation open at the moment looking at the carbon tax schemes, and the government are keen to have more energy efficiency measures as part of those reform packages. And again, we'll be talking about that later on today. So I guess to summarise what EMR is and what it is you can still do about it, whether it's energy efficiency, smarter consumption, looking at demand side response for your business, or if it's just you want your supplier to give you absolute cost certainty for now and in the future, it's really important that you do speak to your supplier about it now. EMR, ultimately, that £11.50 per megawatt hour is the most significant increase compared to any of the other industry changes that are going on. So it's worth still putting it in the forefront of your mind and speaking to your supplier, or come and speak to us about it. So before I ask if there's any questions, to summarise from me, I suppose there's been a shift in policy over the short term, which has created quite a lot of uncertainty. Long term, though, EMR could achieve what we need in the UK. The next 12 months are going to be critical for really embedding EMR and making it a workable reform programme. And costs are delayed, but they haven't gone away. It's still coming. We've still got those big ticket numbers at the end of the decade, so act now. Any questions? Microphone.
Hi, good afternoon. Benedict Gerke from News UK. A question on the overlap between the CFD and the RO. How long can we expect that to be happening?
The overlap?
Yeah.
So the overlap will be until 2017, apart for onshore wind, and then after that date, CFD will be the only option. However, those that already have the RO will get that for 20 years. So RO will still be on your bills until 2037, although it will be coming down over time. Okay. Any more questions?
There's been almost no publicity given to the Fuel Poverty Act recently. It does mature in 2016. Do you expect any changes at all to aspects of EMR as a consequence of that maturation of the Act, which is supposed to remove people from fuel poverty?
It's a very good question. I don't know if I fully know the answer to that one. I don't think I expect any changes to EMR, to be honest. I think this is something the government is committed to, and it will stay around regardless of what other energy policies coexist or change.
You mentioned that the industry is distracted by policies like P272 to a certain extent. Is there any evidence that the government's doing anything to re-engage the industry in ongoing EMR and kind of push it higher up the agenda at all?
That's a good question. Not that I'm aware of. I think it will take until the costs really start to flow through for people to re-engage with it and start to think about what they need to do, which is why we're trying to proactively mention it to people now and make sure that it is still on the agenda.
Hi, my name is Helen. I'm from the capacity market team at DEP. Just to answer that last question about EMR, there is a consultation out on the capacity market at the moment, so if you do wish to contribute to that, it closes on the 10th of December. And we will be doing some stakeholder events as well, just so.
Great, that's good to know. No more? Okay. Thank you. Thanks for your time.